Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about family history research in Mexico. Now, whether you are helping someone with their research, whether you are a first-generation American, whether you are, a 10th generation American, the steps for getting started in family history are the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of those beginning steps. We're going to talk specifically about some naming customs and how you enter that information into your family tree. And then we'll take a look at the records that are available both here in the United States and across the border in Mexico to help you build your family tree. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's just talk first about some basic getting started in genealogy tips. These are common to everybody regardless of what your ethnic background is. The first step is always to start with what you know. Record the information about your own life, put in what you know about your parents and your grandparents, and then talk to those people. Talk to parents and grandparents if they're still around. If they're not, try to figure out what other family members you have that you could talk to. Maybe you have an aunt or a cousin. Maybe you haven't spoken to those people in a long time. Maybe you've never even met them. But getting started in family history is a really good excuse, if you need one, to reach out to family members and to ask them questions about what they remember about their parents and grandparents and what they remember about when and where people were born and what they did and who they were. And just start collecting all of that information. And then once you've collected that information in those two initial steps, then you want to start building a family tree. You want to start make sure that you've got that information recorded. And in this case on Ancestry, we allow you to enter that information into a family tree. Now you can start a family tree on Ancestry for free. You do not have to have an Ancestry.com paid subscription in order to start a family tree. All you need is a guest registration. You give us your email address, you can start building that tree right away. And you're going to want to enter the information that you know. So here I've started a tree. I've started it with somebody who is deceased. You probably will want to start it with yourself and then enter your parents and enter information about your grandparents and just, again, one generation at a time based on the information you've collected about what you know or what you don't know. Now, I've started it with someone deceased here for privacy reasons, but I'm going to go ahead and open up Maria here, and you'll see I've entered some basic information about her. She was born in Los Angeles in 1922. She died in Los Angeles in 2002. I've entered information about her parents. If I have information about her spouse and children, I can enter them here. If I know information about her brothers and sisters, I can enter them here with her parents. And that's just how you get started. You just start by entering what you know about each of these people. And then what happens is Ancestry.com has 15 billion records online. We go to work looking in those records for records that might pertain to your family. And so you'll see over here, you'll get little hints that Ancestry has found some historical records that might be specific to this person you've entered in your tree. Now remember, the keywords there are hints and might be. One of the challenges, particularly with family history research for those of Mexican descent, is that so many of the names are very, very common names. There are very few unique names in Mexican family history research, both given names and surnames, and because there are so many of them, this is an easy example. We'll talk about some naming conventions here in just a minute, but because there are so many names involved, sometimes the combination of names provides hints when, usually it's just keying in on one name combination, like Juan Garcia. How many Juan Garcias are there, right? And so always pay really close attention to those hints. Make sure that what you're looking at matches what you already know about the family. And if it doesn't, or if you're not sure, don't attach that record. It's very easy to get distracted or excited about finding something and end up climbing somebody else's family tree instead of your own. So start entering what you know about those families and then look through some of those hints, but be really careful. Now let's talk about naming conventions or naming customs in Mexico for just a minute. Of course, like everywhere else, there are given names. The difference is that sometimes there are a lot of given names. I think the most that I've ever seen on a parish baptismal record out of Mexico is 7. A young girl who was given 7 names. I guess they wanted to make sure that, her mother and both of her grandmothers and all of her sisters and maybe even the midwife who delivered her were all accounted for in this young girl's name. And so you end up with sometimes a lot of given names, not just a single given name or a given name and a middle name, like is more customary in European tradition. And so be aware of that. Be aware that you could have a whole string of names in that given name field, and you need to account for that. Then, of course, as is traditional, most children are given both their father's surname and their mother's surname as their surname. So their surname almost always consists of 2 names. So here's how you're going to enter that in your tree. If we come in here to Juan, you're going to see Juan Guillermo here as in the given name field. In this case, we call it the first and middle name, but you could have, again, you could have 3 or 4 or 5 additional names in this field. You just keep typing, okay? And then in the surname field, you're going to see here Garcia Suarez. So we've got his father's surname and his mother's surname both listed in that surname field. Okay, so make sure that when you record it, you get those things in the correct field. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the reasons, let's just refresh that. One of the reasons is because our computers a lot of our records are fielded by given name and surname. And so we want to make sure that our computers know which name is the given name and which name is the surname. So making sure that you've got that in the correct place is really important. So you're going to enter birth names into the family tree. So you can see here with Juan, that's easy, but when we come here to Maria, Maria Lucia Bolivar Suarez. Okay, so Maria Lucia would be her given name, and then Bolivar would be her father's surname, and Suarez would be her mother's surname. Now, even though she's married, or that we know that she married Juan, we're not going to enter what is an of name or a DE name, which is once they get married, sometimes people, women use their husband's surname. In this case, you're entering her birth name or her maiden name into the family tree, and just leave it at that, okay? Now, you will come across a case, or maybe several, it happens in every family, where sometimes a child is only recorded with one surname. And that is I love Mexican research for this reason. The reason is I can look at this family tree, and even though I only have this one young woman and her 2 parents listed, I already know that both her father's and mother's maiden names, her father's mother and her mother's maiden name is Suarez. So I've got clues right in their name about who they are. Also, I get clues if there's only one surname. A single surname in a parish register or on a birth civil registration, a government registration of a birth, almost always is a signifier that that child is illegitimate, and so that it's just the mother's surname that's listed, okay? So that's a really good clue that all you're looking at is a known mother and you possibly have an unknown father. Now, sometimes you're going to see 2 surnames that are identical. And we're going to use this family here as an example because things sometimes get a little crazy, okay? So both Juan and Maria have a mother whose maiden name is Suarez, okay? And the reason is because they're cousins, and that happens. It happens a lot. And so, we can come in here and we can maybe add Juan's mother and Maria's mother, and then you go back another generation and you discover that they have the same grandparents, okay? And what happens sometimes is when you get intermarriage in families, or when you don't have a lot of surname variation and there are a lot of common surnames, by the time you get to certain people in your tree, they're going to have 2 surnames that are identical. You're going to end up with like a Guillermo Giuseppe Suarez, okay? And that's okay. because maybe there's some intermarriage or maybe there's some common surnames. However, a naming custom, just another naming custom to be aware of, is that sometimes if both surnames are the same, it could be a clue to what is in civil registration in Mexico called a natural birth, or again, an illegitimate birth. The mother, for whatever reason, instead of wanting to just put down a single surname, like you would if the child was illegitimate, puts her surname down twice, so that, you know, for whatever reason, right? But that could be that there is an illegitimacy there as well. So sometimes it happens legitimately that cousins marrying or common surnames, you end up with a double surname that's the same. Sometimes that is just a clue to you that there could be an unknown father. So keep an eye out for those things as you enter the names in your trees. You start to do your research so that you know kind of what things you should be looking for, or what other ways you should be thinking about this family structure. Now, let's talk about records in the U.S. briefly before we dive into records in Mexico. If you are living here in the United States and you and your parents and or grandparents also lived here in the United States, you're going to want to get started with U.S. records before you dive into the records from Mexico. And there are just some basic records that we use in all genealogy research. We're going to start with census records. The U.S. federal census is taken every 10 years. The most recently available census is 1940. So there is a 72-year privacy law on that census, which means that 1940 is the most recently available census. The 1950 census will become available in 2022, which is not nearly as far away as it sounds. And so if you had family here in the United States in 1940, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, look for them in that 1940 census to see if there is additional information. It'll corroborate what you know about their birth year. It could give you additional information about family structure. Maybe there are aunts or uncles or cousins living with the family that you didn't know about, or that passed away before you or your parents were born. Those census records become really important. Very often census records will also list immigration status. So when did they come into the United States? Are they a U.S. citizen, or are they still an alien citizen? All of that information is included on census records, and so pay close attention to those. There are also birth, marriage, and death records here in the United States, and when we talk about two of the largest states for Mexican migration into the United States are California and Texas. And California and Texas are both fairly open record states. Every state sets its own privacy laws for birth, marriage, and death records, and Texas and California are open record states, which means that most of the birth, marriage, and death records, or at least indexes to them, are available on Ancestry. One of the tools on Ancestry that you need to be really familiar with is our card catalog. You're going to find that under the search option on Ancestry. And this is where, if you've started a tree with a guest account or a free account, this is where you're going to have to start paying for a subscription, is when you start accessing the records on our website that are going to validate or give you additional information about what's in your family tree. So I'm going to come in here to the card catalog. And if I use this family as I continue to use this family as an example, I could type in California and click search, and that's going to show me that there is a California birth index that goes from 1905 to 1995. There's a California death index that starts in 1940 and goes through 1997. And then there's a couple of marriage indexes. They've been broken up just because of the way that we received them. This one is 1960 to 1985. There's one down here from 1949 to 1950. And then if I come down a little bit further, I'm going to see a California death index from 1905 to 1939. So it goes right up to that 1940 date. So we've got millions and millions and millions of California birth, marriage, and death records. And you can do that kind of search for any location. Texas, you'll see again a similar thing. Some states not as open with their records, and so if your family lives in a different location, you may only have marriage records available, or birth records may only be available up through 50, 75, 100 years ago, and nothing more recent is available online. Now, that doesn't mean you still can't access it. You just have to write to the state vital records office in order to get copies of records that they will not allow to be put publicly online. So whatever state it is that your family has ended up in, you can just do a quick search in the card catalog to see what records we have available, and then you can go search that particular database for birth, marriage, and death records. Ancestry also has a very large collection of what we call our border crossing records. These came from the National Archives, and they go from 1895 through 1964. There's 5.8 million records in this collection. It is just one way. So you can see here for Canada, we have people who've crossed the border from Canada into the U.S., and people who've crossed the border from the U.S. into Canada. For Mexico, all we have is people who have crossed the border from Mexico into the United States. And if you happen to find your family in this particular collection, or even if your family has been here for several generations, still look at this particular record collection. And the reason is that very often we see people going back and forth across the border, sometimes several times throughout their lifetime, visiting family members. And very often these border crossing lists will list information, additional information about other family members that they might be visiting, have visited, coming into the United States to visit. Okay, and so be sure to check out this particular database. And just because you find family members in this database once, don't stop there. Keep looking. Like I said, sometimes several times throughout their lives, they've been recorded crossing the border back and forth for family reasons, almost always. And so then there's also some military records. If your family has been here since World War II, World War I, look and see if they served, enlisted in the U.S. military, or if they were eligible to register for the draft. Even if they didn't serve, there might be draft cards available that give additional information about the men who had to register for the draft, birth dates, sometimes specific birth locations, as well as descriptions, which is always fun to find out how tall they were and how much they weighed, and maybe if they had any distinguishing marks. Sometimes you'll also see their signature across the bottom of that card, and that's always a little thrilling. So military records. And then newspapers. Newspapers are a treasure trove of information. Most specifically, if your family passed away here in the United States, you might want to look for obituaries or other records that detail information about their lives. So that's kind of a high level, really quick, for those of you who are brand new to family history, introduction to some of the records available in the United States that you can use. Now, once you get your family back into Mexico, and again, whether that's whether you are the immigrant or it was your great-great-great-great-grandparents, some of these same records are going to be the records that you're going to use. And you're going to notice that some of these are just as familiar. So the two big collections or kinds of records that are currently available online for Mexico family history research, we have some census records. Most notably, we have the 1930 Mexican census, which is a really pivotal year there. And the reason it's pivotal is because a lot of people can remember family members back to 1930, but it's prior to that that you start getting a little fuzzy. And so if you have grandparents or great-grandparents who were alive in 1930, that's who you're going to want to locate on that 1930 Mexican census, because again, it's going to give you additional information about how old they were and where specifically they may have been born and who else in the family is living in the household, what they did for a living. I mean, all sorts of really great information available on that federal census, countrywide Mexico census in 1930. We also do have some local or regional censuses that may have been done by state or by county. We'll take a look at that list here in just a minute. The other big kind of record is our birth, marriage, and death records. However, in Mexico, because, of course, the Catholic Church is so very prevalent, civil registration or government records of birth, marriage, and death exist, but there are also parish registers. Now, parish registers, of course, they're not recording births and deaths per se. What they're recording are christenings of children okay? And that usually also includes a child's birth date. And then they're also recording burials in Catholic cemeteries. And so then, of course, you have also usually a death date. So civil registration is government birth, marriage, and death records. And parish registers are usually the local parish recording the baptisms, marriages, and burials in that location. So those are the really big, important records, and it's fantastic that those records are available. So if we go back into our card catalog, again, that's going to be the easiest, fastest way to see if the records you need are available online. So I'm going to go ahead and just type in Mexico and click search. You're going to see Ancestry has 64 databases that contain Mexican records. However, I mean, we're talking millions of them, right? 123 million records in this single database. This is baptisms across Mexico from 1560 through 1950. Here's that 1930 Mexico National Census that I mentioned, and that is a pretty big deal. 12.8 million people that were counted in the country at that time. 21 million people included in this marriage database that dates again all the way back to the 1500s, which is earlier, obviously, than any records available here in the United States. The records here in the U.S. only go back to about 1620 at the earliest, and even then they're pretty scarce. So really excellent that there's some records. Then there's also the death records, just under 1 million of those from 1680 to 1840. Then what you want to start looking for are some of those civil registration or parish registers. Now, you can look through this list of all 64 databases. It's a couple, 3 pages long. Or if you know that your family was in a particular region or state in Mexico, you can then filter it down further by that specific location. So if I know that my family was in Chihuahua, I can filter down to Chihuahua, and you can see here are all of the databases that contain records for that specific location. In this case, civil registration or government birth, marriage, and death records date back to 1861 and go through 1997 online. 1.5 million of those records. That's going to be a database I'm probably, if my family's from there, going to want to spend some time in looking at those records. So all of those are records that are available on Ancestry. Again, if you want access to the records themselves, that's where you have to pay the subscription. And here's kind of the tricky thing here in the US. You can purchase a US subscription, or you can purchase a world subscription. So that your options are US or the world. And so do all the research you can in US records first. I would encourage you to do that. And then when you're ready to research in Mexico records, upgrade to the world subscription so that you have access to those. Use that card catalog first, though, to make sure that we've got the records for the place in Mexico where your family happens to be from, so that you know that that we've got the records available online that you need before you upgrade. Well, that is all I have prepared for you today. This was just an introduction to family history research, and particularly with a focus on Mexico records. If you have any additional questions and you're watching this at our regularly scheduled time, I will be on chat in just a few minutes to answer any additional questions you may have. If you're watching a recorded version of this on YouTube, please leave any questions or comments you have in the comments field just below the video. We do monitor those and will respond as necessary. You can also check out the schedule for our upcoming events on our Facebook page. If you just go to Ancestry.com on Facebook, click on that events tab, you're going to see the topics and dates for our upcoming presentations. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.